Court is in session. The Honorable Mary E. Roberts presiding.
Good afternoon. Please be seated.
Your Honor, this is the State of Washington versus Gary Ridjueya, clause number 11-1012871. This is Glenn McDonald and Jeff Baird for the state. Mr. Ridjueya is present, represented by his attorney, Mark Crawford. We're here for scheduled arraignment on the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree. You understand that Mr. Ridjueya intends to sentence sentencing.
Very well.
And if I may proceed to arraign the defendant.
Please do.
Mr. Ridjueya, you have a copy of the information in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Would you please state your true name?
Gary Leon Ridjueya.
Do you understand in this case you've been charged with one count of aggravated murder in the first degree?
Yes.
And do you understand the element crime that you in King County, Washington, on or about December 3rd, 1982, with premeditated intent to cause the death of another person, did cause the death of Rebecca Marrero, a human being who died on or about December 3rd, 1982? Do you understand those are the elements of this crime?
Yes.
Do you understand that the state's alleged an aggravating circumstance, that there was more than one victim, and this murder and the other murders were part of a common scheme or plan? Do you understand the aggravating circumstance that's been alleged?
Yes.
How do you plead to the crime that's been charged?
Guilty.
And Your Honor, I would request that Mr. Baird be allowed to conduct a colloquy with the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Ridjueya, I have in front of me something called a Statement of Defendant on Plea of Guilty. What I have is a copy. Do you have the original of that document in front of you?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you a few questions about that. First of all, the gentleman seated just here to your right is Mr. Prothero, is that right?
Yes, he is.
And Mr. Prothero is your lawyer on this case?
Yes.
And he was your attorney as well in the 2003 case that you had?
Yes.
Now, have you had an opportunity to review this document, this statement of yours, with Mr. Prothero?
Yes.
Did Mr. Prothero read it to you?
Yes.
Did he read the entire document to you?
Yes.
Did he discuss the entire document with you?
Yes.
Did he answer any questions that you might have had about anything said in this document?
Yes.
Mr. Ridjueya, you understand that as of just a few moments ago, you indicated a desire to plead guilty to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree. You understand that?
Yes.
Now, you've been charged with aggravated murder before, correct?
Yes.
And that was in 2001, right?
Yes.
And in 2003, you entered pleas of guilty to a number of charges of aggravated murder, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, in this case, as in that case, before the court's going to accept your plea of guilty, we want to make sure that you understand that you are giving up a number of rights by pleading guilty. You understand that?
Yes.
Now, if you look on page 2 of your plea statement, there's a number of rights there that are listed that you give up when you plead guilty. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
There's one right in particular that I'd like to ask you some questions about, and that's the right to go to trial. Understand that by pleading guilty today, you give up your right to go to trial in this case.
Yes.
You understand that if you did go to trial, you wouldn't just automatically be found guilty, but the prosecution would have to try to convince 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed this crime. You understand that?
Yes.
And that would involve proving a number of what are called elements. Has Mr. Prothero reviewed this with you?
Yes, he has.
In this particular case, Mr. Ridjueya, these elements include things like this. First of all, that you were the one responsible for the death of this person. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Secondly, we'd have to prove that this individual that you killed was Rebecca Marrero. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you understand that we'd have to prove that you killed her on or around December the 3rd of 1982. You understand that?
Yes.
You understand we'd have to prove that this happened in King County?
Yes.
Do you understand we'd have to prove that you did so with what's called premeditated intent? That is, that you did it deliberately and you thought about it before you did it.
Yes.
And finally, do you understand that we would have to prove, because this is a crime of aggravated murder, that what you did there involved a common scheme or plan involving other victims of murder. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Finally, do you understand that under the terms of the plea that you entered in 2003, you have given up your right to appeal any part of this conviction and any part of the sentence? Do you understand that?
Yes.
Now, if the court accepts your plea, we're going to make a recommendation to the judge that you serve the rest of your life in prison on this case, that you are never eligible for parole or release of any kind. You understand that?
Yes.
And you understand that we're going to recommend that this sentence is imposed consecutively to the 48 other life sentences that you're presently serving. You understand that?
Yes.
We're also going to recommend that you make restitution to the Marrero family and that you pay a number of court-imposed fees and financial obligations like a victim penalty assessment and the DNA fund. You understand that?
Yes.
Now, do you understand in addition that this judge has no option but to sentence you to prison for your entire life on this case?
Yes.
And that this judge has no option but to sentence you to prison without any possibility of ever being released or paroled?
Yes.
Do you understand and agree that under the terms of your plea of guilty in 2003, you're obligated to plead guilty today to this crime?
Yes.
Apart from that obligation, has anybody made any threats against you to get you to plead guilty?
No.
Has anybody made any promises to you to try to get you to plead guilty?
No.
Are you making this plea freely and voluntarily of your own free will?
Yes.
Here at paragraph 12 on page 5, it says that you have made a statement to the judge in this case.
Yes.
And that statement begins in King County, Washington, on or about December 3rd, 1982, with premeditated intent to cause her death. I strangled Rebecca Marrero to death. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes.
Your statement continues, I picked her up, planning to kill her. Is that true?
Yes.
It goes on, after killing her, I placed her body at the top of a ravine near the 29,600 block of 65th Avenue South in Auburn, Washington. Is that true?
Yes.
Your statement continues to say that this murder was part of your common scheme or plan to kill as many women whom you thought were prostitutes as you possibly could. Is that true?
Yes.
Were the victims of the prior case against you, the one you pled guilty to in 2003, were those victims also part of that same common scheme and plan?
Yes.
At that time, in 2003, you made a statement about your plan, which you repeat here at the bottom of page 5. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that statement reads as follows. I picked prostitutes as my victim because I hate most prostitutes and I did not want to pay them for sex. Is that true?
Yes.
It says I also picked prostitutes as victims because they were easy to pick up without being noticed. Is that true?
Yes.
It says I knew they would not be reported missing right away and might never be reported missing. Is that true?
Yes.
It says, mostly I picked prostitutes because I knew I could kill lots of them without getting caught. Is that your statement? Another part of this statement continues here, says, another part of my plan involved where I put the bodies of the women. Most of the time, I took the women's jewelry and their clothes to get rid of any evidence and make them harder to identify. Is that true?
Yes.
Your statement continues, I placed the bodies of most of them close to each other in what I call clusters. I did this because I wanted to keep track of all the women I killed. Is that true?
Yes.
And the last sentence reads, I like to drive by the clusters around the county and think about the women I placed there. Is that true?
Yes.
Mr. Ridgway, if you turn to page, it appears that you agree, after talking with Mr. Prothero, that before the judge decides whether or not to accept your plea, she may review something called the certification for determination of probable cause, in this case involving Rebecca Marrero, as well as a summary that the prosecutors prepared and filed for the 2003 case called the prosecutor's summary of the evidence. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you agree with that? And the final paragraph says that your lawyer has explained to you and you have fully discussed with him all the matters that we've discussed here this morning and all the matters contained in your statement of defendant on plea of guilty. Is that true?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have signed the statement of defendant on plea of guilty because I believe it's in the interest of justice and because I believe the evidence is that Mr. Ridgway is doing this freely and knowingly and intelligently and voluntarily. And I know that the court may have questions of him and that Mr. Prothero may have some remarks. Thank you.
Okay, I will ask a few questions of Mr. Ridgway. Mr. Baird did a thorough job of going through the statement. Mr. Ridgway, I want to go through a few items again with you to be sure that I know that this plea is appropriate. Have you had plenty of time to discuss this with Mr. Prothero?
Yes, I have.
Have you gone through every word of this statement?
Yes.
When you read this together with Mr. Prothero, was he able to answer all the questions that you had for him?
Yes, he was.
Aside from the terms of the plea agreement that you entered into some time ago, has anyone made any threats to you or any promises to you to get you to enter into this plea today?
No.
Do you have any questions of Mr. Prothero or of me before I decide whether to accept your plea?
No, I don't.
Mr. Prothero, did you want to add anything?
Yes, Your Honor, I'll add that I've had spent several hours with Mr. Ridgway going over the statement of defendant on plea of guilty as well as the plea agreement that we entered into 2003. We agreed that this case fell within the scope of that plea agreement. I'm confident that he is competent to enter his plea today, and he's doing so knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily, and we would also ask you to accept his plea.
Okay. Based on the preceding colloquy with Mr. Baird, the questioning that I have had with Mr. Ridgway, and the comments from Mr. Prothero, I do find that the statement on plea of guilty has been made knowingly, intelligently, voluntarily, competently, and with an understanding of the nature of this charge and the consequences of this plea. Based on Mr. Ridgway's statements and the information that's contained in the certification for the determination of probable cause, which I reviewed before this hearing, I'm satisfied that there's a factual basis for this plea as well. Mr. Ridgway, I'm going to ask you one more time. To the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
I accept the plea.
Your Honor, I'll have Mr. Ridgway sign the original and hand that forward to the court. Your Honor, all parties have signed off on the statement. May I approach?
Please. I've now signed the statement as well. And it's our intention today to move on to sentencing, correct, counsel?
That's correct, Your Honor. Murder in the first degree carries a mandatory
penalty of life in prison without possibility of release or parole. So the state's recommendation is the court impose that consecutive to the 48 other life sentences in King County 011-10270-9. The state also requests a no contact order with the family of Rebecca Marrero, that the court impose mandatory fines that existed back when this crime occurred, which is the $50 victim penalty assessment, the DNA fee, and court costs and recoupment of attorney's fees. There are family members present of Rebecca Marrero. I know, I've been informed at least one, Mary Marrero, wishes to address the court.
Okay, I'm happy to hear from her.
This is my mother. She's 79 years old. This is my daughter. I thank you for giving me this time to speak on behalf of my only sister, Becky Marrero. My name is Mary Marrero. It's been a long 29 years without Becky Marrero. Wondering every minute, every day, every year what happened to her. Crying at night, feeling helpless. She is so special to me. We did everything together. It was nice having a big sister. The day she came up missing, I wanted to kill myself. And I fight that feeling every day, especially today, Your Honor. Becky Marrero was a good mother. It was hard when my niece, Shantae Fastall, asked about her mother, Becky Marrero. It tore me into pieces. No child should be without a mother ever. Shantae has been feeling abandoned until December 23rd, 2011. She finally understood what happened to her mother, that she was murdered, and she was able to put her mother to rest on February 5th, 2011. 29 years later, Your Honor. My poor mother, who was 79 years old, lived to see her daughter be put to rest. She looked for her every day and never gave up hope. My brother, Perfecto Marrero, was so very close to his sister that after she went missing, he had been in and out of jail. There's so much anger. No one can save him. No therapist can help him. He's looking at his third strike now. He is incarcerated. And he wasn't able to attend the funeral. That's a shame. It breaks my heart, Your Honor. My family has had a horrible life due to my sister's murder. We have no understanding why we have been attacked by murder all our life. My daughter Josie, 17, Taylor, 17, grandparents 63 and 64 were murdered. Quadruple murder, Your Honor. Where do we go from here? What does it take to get the death penalty in the state of Washington? My sister is victim 49. I don't agree with this plea deal to spare his pathetic life. The rest of the victims will be found just like Becky. He knew when he showed where Maria Malvar was. My sister laid there a half a mile from her, helpless, out of breath. He knew Becky was lying there. He chose not to give her up. He knows where all his victims are and what he did to them. He is very smart. He saved his life, managed to get a plea deal. It makes me sick to my stomach that he beat the system. He's worthless, and he's not going to give any more victims up. They will be found by good Samaritans. He knows where they all are and what he did to them. They are his trophies. He will never give those innocent victims up for nothing. He's a waste of society and a waste of space. If I had one thing to ask you today, it would be kill him. He has them just like he beat his victims. I know he will burn in hell because you can't be God. God will take care of him since the system failed to do so. 49 women, aunts, mothers, sisters, cousins. We're talking about a whole generation. I ask you again, what do you have to do in the state of Washington to get the death penalty? I am very devastated and very emotional right now. And the system has failed to protect us, those victims. My heart goes out to all the families, and I hope they can find their loved ones. I hate your guts, Gary Ridgway, and your day is coming soon. You are a waste of space, and your day is coming soon. That's all, Your Honor, and I thank you for allowing me to speak for the whole Marrero family after 29 years of pain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This way, Mama.
That's the extent of the state's presentation for sentencing.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Prothero?
Your Honor, we concur that that's the only lawful sentence that can be imposed, and so we agree with the state's recommendation.
Okay. Mr. Ridgway, the law gives you the opportunity to speak as well. Was there anything you wanted to say to me before I make a decision on your sentence?
I'm sorry for saying
Don't say anything, just shut your mouth and sit the
Excuse
defend me through all this thing.
shut up.
Sir,
Nobody wants to hear from you.
excuse me, sir, please.
We don't save spares pain.
Can you please be seated?
Mama,
Could you please be seated?
gotta sit down. Judge is asking you to sit down. Respect her.
Thank you, Ms. Marrero. I appreciate very much hearing from the family of Rebecca Marrero. Ms. Marrero and the others who have come today, thank you for coming today. I also received a letter from Jenny Weiland, the Executive Director of Families and Friends of Violent Crime Victims, which I considered in coming to my decision in this case. Of course, I don't have very much discretion in what I can do today. To the friends and families of Rebecca Marrero, I want to say a few things. My heart goes out to you. I am sorry for your loss. I see the picture of Ms. Marrero here, a beautiful young woman. I'm sorry you've had to wait this long for some truth and for some justice. I'm sorry you had to wait 28 long years in order to learn what happened and to come to this courtroom and see some justice. I appreciate that you are not content with the outcome of this case. I appreciate that you have come in a respectful manner to express that, and I hope that you will find some justice today. Mr. Ridgway, I have little to say to you. I am a judge of few words. I rarely lecture. I rarely chastise. I know it would make no difference to you. Usually, when I sentence an individual, even for the most serious of crimes, I reach out with some humanity. In this case, I cannot. I can find no compassion. Instead, today, my heart is simply filled with sympathy for Rebecca Marrero's family and despair to know that a person is capable of this horrific crime. I do not hesitate to impose upon the defendant the following sentence. For the murder of Rebecca Marrero, for which I have found you guilty of aggravated murder in the first degree, you will serve a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of early release or parole. This sentence will run consecutive to the 48 other sentences already imposed upon you under King County Superior Court Case number 011-102070-9. You will have no contact with the family of Rebecca Marrero for that same period of time. You will be required to pay restitution to the family to be determined at another time. Mr. Prothero, what's your client's position with regard to presence at any restitution hearing?
Your Honor, he would waive his presence in any restitution.
Thank you. You'll be required to pay the $50 mandatory victim penalty assessment, which is the amount that was mandatory at the time that this crime was committed. I will require you to pay the maximum fine of $50,000 as well. You'll pay the court costs and recoupment of attorney's fees. I think that completes the sentence. Counsel, if you're completing the paperwork, please. I haven't been provided with that amount. Do we know, Madam Clerk, what the amount of court costs is? Okay.
Fingerprints on the form and signed that, as well as the notice of rights on the appeal of 1073 notice and moves forward.
Thank you.
I've prepared the judgment and sentence in accordance with the court's oral ruling.
reviewed the judgment and sentence that Mr. McDonald prepared, and it accurately reflects the court's oral sentence. I've signed the judgment and sentence, and Mr. Ridgway has also signed his notice of ineligibility to possess firearm and loss of right to vote. May I?
Yes, please. $200, okay, thank you. I have signed the judgment and sentence. I've signed the notice of ineligibility to possess firearm and loss of right to vote. I see that Mr. Ridgway has signed his notice of rights on appeal and rights pursuant to RCW 10.73. Mr. Ridgway, did you read this document?
Yes, I did.
Do you understand everything in it?
Yes, I do.
Did you go over it with Mr. Prothero?
Yes.
Okay. I think that completes the proceeding.